Hello, everyone. My name is Ariel Sokolov. I'm the Senior Engagement Manager at JDC Entwine. I'm coming to you from my New York City apartment. Welcome to this week's Entwine Exclusive. For those of you who might not know us yet, who might be new to JDC and to Entwine, Entwine is the young adult platform of JDC, the world's leading Jewish humanitarian organization, and we operate in over 70 countries worldwide. Thank you to everyone who joined our Entwine Exclusive last week with Josh Yudkin. I see a lot of returning people in the attendee list, which is really great. Josh shared his expertise with us as an epidemiologist and an expert in public health. And this week, we're going to go a bit further and dive into JDC's strategy in responding to COVID-19 and learn how this global organization responds in times of crises. So a couple of housekeeping tips. Miriam is here monitoring the Q&A and the chat on Zoom. She posted a hello in the chat. Feel free to post questions there. There's also a Q&A feature on the Zoom platform that you can use. And we also have somebody on Facebook monitoring the comments in case you want to post any questions there as well. So this week, our featured speaker on the Entwine Exclusive is going to be interviewed by Kate Belza O'Bannon. Kate is the Senior Director of Strategy at Repair the World, and she is a longtime alumna of Entwine. She served as a year-long Jewish Service Corps Fellow in Argentina. She has traveled with us on several trips, and she currently sits on JDC's Board of Directors. So Kate, thank you so much for being with us this week.
Thanks, Ariel. I appreciate it. And fun fact, Ariel and I actually served the same year as Jewish Service Corps Fellows. And when I finished my year in Argentina, I went and visited Ariel in Rwanda, which I still have like super fond memories of, even though it was, I think, 7 years ago at this point. But thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. As Ariel said, I'm Repair's Senior Director of Strategy. And here today, I really am a proud board member of JDC and a just passionate person who cares about the organization. And I'm excited to be able to ask Asher some questions and also ask some of you some questions. So first, I want to introduce you all to Asher. Asher is JDC's interim CEO, and he has been in a long time joint-nick. He has been with the organization for over 3 decades, and has 3 decades of senior leadership experience at JDC. He's been a key advisor to our Europe, Asia, North Africa operations. He helped design and lead JDC's transformative work reviving Jewish life and aiding needy Jews in the former Soviet Union for more than 20 years before that. And he previously served as the organization's senior executive for international affairs. So Asher, thank you for being with us today. And we really, really appreciate it. And wanted to just sort of start out with a little bit about you. So if you could share for everyone, who are you? What's your current role, and what have been some of your former roles at JDC? And what are some of the areas of expertise you've been thinking about day to day right now?
Great. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I want to apologize for those who were on, I guess it was yesterday, that I had to cancel at the last minute because something came up related to the virus and our response in Latin America. So I apologize, but thank you very much for, on very short notice, redoing everything. I started with JDC in 1986. I was directed our office in Vienna. My wife and I took our little baby from the States, and we lived in Vienna for 3 years. We worked with, primarily I worked with refugees, some coming from Eastern Europe. At the time I got there, many were coming from Iran. They were being smuggled out through, it's a little hard to believe now, but they have from Iran, before they came to Vienna, they had to wait 6 weeks in transit, and the place they waited was in Pakistan, in Karachi. And I started to work in Eastern Europe. In 1986, I was working in a country that no longer exists, Yugoslavia. I have a little bit of history with the joint working with countries that eventually fall apart, Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union. In 1989, we moved to London, and I deepened my involvement in Eastern Europe, in Hungary. And then in 1991, we were in furtive negotiations with the Soviets, and I started to work in the Soviet Union, established our department there, moved to Israel in '92, and did that for about 21 years. And being the interim CEO was not part of my career trajectory, but JDC came to me and I agreed. So I've been in New York from September till basically till now, and I'm speaking to you from the last few hours of my quarantine in Jerusalem.
Thank you, Asher. And one other question in terms of your current role, how has your role shifted amidst this COVID-19 pandemic? What are some of the ways in which it's shifted?
Look, I think when I first took over the position as the interim, I was really going to be a bridge between the previous CEO and whoever's appointed the next CEO. So my job was, in sort of broad terms, making sure that the trains run on time, and things operated the way they're supposed to. And then all of a sudden, this COVID showed up, and we closed our office. And first I worked from New York, and now from here in Jerusalem. And it's really to make sure a number of things that we, the areas that we move in, as you can imagine, first of all, things develop very, very quickly. And second of all, the needs are enormous and often unpredictable. So probably the most important thing is to make sure that whatever we do get involved in, we're mission aligned. There are certain areas that we, I think, have an expertise in, and it would be easy to deviate from those wherever we work. And just to make sure that it's aligned, make sure that our donor base is on board, make sure that we are briefing the right people, that our board understands where we're going and what our responsibilities are, and also to our staff. Yeah.
Thank you. And diving into that a bit more, I'm curious if you could share some of the challenges you're currently seeing in Jewish communities around the world from your vantage point. What are some of those challenges?
Okay. Well, start with something actually that we're not all that involved with directly, which are the European Jewish communities. Many of them are small. They're based on institutions and organizations that really survive from either fee-for-service or dues. And with the economy basically imploding, a lot of them are teetering. So once the institutions and the organizations in a community teeter and might possibly collapse, that could spell the end, for all intents and purposes, of a community. So there are places that we know of Italy, we know Spain, France is moving in that direction, but it is safe to assume that most of the European Jewish communities will have those kinds of crises. If we move further east, probably our biggest challenge is in the former Soviet Union. One of the things that we do, one of the major things that we do, we have an extensive welfare program for the elderly, and about 30,000 of the people who depend on us get home care services. And as the belt sort of tightens in these countries, it becomes increasingly difficult to provide those services. So first, public transportation was stopped in a number of the major cities, so it made it harder for the home care workers to get to the people they're supposed to serve. Then the next step were a lot of the workers themselves became sick. And then in some places, food isn't necessarily available or medicine isn't available. So the kinds of goods and services that we give to these people, many of whom, for whom it's really life-saving, it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. We're sort of holding on with our fingertips, but if things keep moving in this direction, which it looks like it will, at least that part of the world, things will. There's some very painful decisions that we're going to have to make, and some of them will be made for us. In Israel, as JDC is very involved in human services in Israel, in almost all aspects of human services. We do, the vulnerable. So I'll give you one example of something that's extremely problematic. The unemployment levels, as they have everywhere else in the world, are skyrocketing. There are areas in the periphery of Israel where families were just barely hanging on. And the people were not particularly, there were jobs that weren't for people with particular skills. They became unemployed. Their children are home and really can't wander around outside, so they're underfoot. and we are seeing a tremendous rise in domestic violence. And almost across the board in almost every area in which we work, we're seeing problems that always existed on a smaller level really exploding in terms of their dimensions and their scope. And it's both painful to watch, but I'm glad that we're able to do something about it.
Thanks, Asher. I know I saw, I think it was last night on some type of social media platform, some photos of home care workers in the FSU on bicycles with masks, which really just took my breath away. And I think what I'm hearing from you is some of the challenges are around the increasing unemployment and the increasing sort of loss of safety net for so many communities, that as well as how to really continue these critical operations that have been life-saving pre-pandemic.
Well, I think you actually raise a point which I think is really very important to understand. Most of the places in which, or many of the places in which we work, especially in Eastern Europe and North Africa, there really isn't a safety net. And so we are the safety net. So while we could point to explosive unemployment in the United States, and it's certainly extremely painful to see, the situation is even worse in some of the places in which we work, because there really is no safety net. There's nothing to do. So for example, many of these places they have on paper, but they don't in practice have unemployment insurance. So when people lose their jobs, and if they're living hand to mouth, in many instances, they literally don't have what to eat they won't have what to eat starting this month already.
Thank you. As an internal optimist, I have to also ask about some bright spots and would love to hear from you, like in sort of shifting your mind for a moment, what are some of the bright spots that you've been seeing across JDC and across these global communities right now?
First of all, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because that is rarely asked, and I think it's got to be out there. We are seeing a surge in volunteerism. Both in Jewish communities in which we work outside of Israel and in Israel itself. People saying, look, if you don't have home care workers aren't going to come and bring food and medicine, tell us what. And there have been apps that now have been developed. Actually, JDC was instrumental in developing to match volunteers and people who get home care services. The whole issue of the elderly, of the loneliness that the elderly confront, some of them who've been, who are more technologically oriented. There have been all sorts of programs that have developed, people contacting them. And when they aren't, then just calling on the phone and speaking for an hour to someone who otherwise is literally homebound, and gives them a sense of connection. So this volunteerism and this desire of people to help in any way has really been, I think, extraordinary and really very, very inspirational.
Totally. And for both of those factors, I'm curious, like, what do you think has made those components successful in this moment?
Has made when you say successful, what do you,
so for sure, so thinking about the surge of volunteerism as an example, how has like JDC been able to like sort of take that momentum and make it successful in this moment? Is there like a specific example that you'd be able to share?
Well, as I think Entwine knows, we're running a hackathon now about worldwide about how to make Passover more meaningful. A lot of people, a lot of families are going to be at Seder for the first time. Certainly we will be without our extended family, the children and grandchildren. And I think that the sort of ability to identify problems that may have been beneath the surface, that either we didn't know about or starting to surface now, and people coming forward and saying, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And putting their brain power to making sure that these things happen. The enormous number of volunteers, there was a difficulty, and the system was a little bit overwhelmed. They didn't know how to match, not just in terms of skills, but also even geographically. How do you find someone who doesn't need to rely on public transportation to help relieve the the loneliness of an elderly person or an older couple. And those kinds of things, people have just, even in terms of doing the development for the technology, have volunteered their time, worked around the clock, and it's made a real difference. And it's really very, very moving to see.
Thank you for sharing that. With my day job and working at Repair the World that really cares about volunteerism, it's like so inspiring for me to see the ways in which people across the world are trying to do something good in this moment, even when it's challenging.
It's been amazing. Yeah. It's really been amazing. It's been amazing.
Definitely.
And even not just in terms of people, not just volunteering, but people, leaders of communities around the world. Sometimes a Jewish communal leader, we know most of them because most of them gone through either our training programs in Europe or are graduates of the camp at Sarbash. The younger ones, they are committed to making sure that whatever the vulnerable in their community need, they get, and that the community itself provides services and connections for people in this very difficult period. It's wonderful to see.
Definitely. Thank you. My next question for you is around Jewish values. I feel like I've had the privilege to hear you share some Jewish values that guide you through the years that I've known you. But I'm curious right now, what is a Jewish value or a couple of Jewish values that are really guiding you during this time?
Well, it's interesting you asked that because I was doing some work this morning, writing an article, and we're just a couple of days away from Passover and the Seder, and it got me to thinking about what's the message of Passover. So we normally, if you say what's the holiday about, they'll say the Exodus from Egypt, and I've increasingly become convinced that actually isn't the message. The message isn't the Exodus. The message is the time that the Bible records of people being enslaved and what that's done to the sort of the DNA and the the expectation is how a Jew's supposed to see the world. That experience of slaves was supposed to make us into an empathetic people, and it's repeated over and over again in the Bible. The ethical behavior, the reason for ethical behavior that's given is because you were slaves in Egypt. In other words, you were abused, you were vulnerable, you know what it's like, and now that means that you have to treat the world in a very different way. So that notion of empathy that I'm seeing over and over again expressed now as we face these crises, I think it's extraordinary, and I think it is to me, that really is what the theme of this holiday is about. And the fact that it's all coming together now, I think is very moving.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Asher. Shifting gears a bit, thinking towards the future. I feel like at a time like this, it's both for sure thinking about sort of moment by moment and day by day, and at the same time in your role, it's also starting to think about the future. And curious if you could share a bit around how GDC is approaching conversations about the future during such an uncertain time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a major piece for us in Israel, particularly. Because the whole setup for human services is almost so overwhelmed right now, it is clear that even in the post-virus environment, we're going to face a lot of the same challenges that we're facing now. There's going to still be massive unemployment. There's going to be a need to reskill people. There's going to be family dysfunction that's a residue of all of that. And what we are trying to do as we mobilize to help social services in Israel address the problem today, we're also giving thought about how those human services have to be redone. So you may know that JDC is involved in job training and retraining for populations that aren't well integrated into the workforce. So the ultra-Orthodox and Arabs, we were dealing with numbers before. Those numbers have expanded enormously because now there's so much more unemployment. It's not a question of just doing more of what we were doing before. We really have to sort of rethink the concept and see what there are whole parts of the economy that not only have collapsed, tourism, the restaurants, hotels, and leisure time places. How are these people going to be reintegrated? Because those parts of the economy are not going to, it's going to take quite a while, years, till they come back to where they were. And in the meantime, people have to be employed and systems have to be rebuilt. So one of the things that JDC Israel is looking to do as it works with the government and works with the various ministries of social service is talk about the day after. What are we doing now that will be continued, be expanded, be improved once we get past this, which hopefully will be soon.
Thank you, Asher. And digging into that a bit more, sort of from that global perspective, I see that there's a ton of Jewish professionals on the call and others as well, and others that are sort of just planning for the future in general. I'm curious from sort of your CEO perch, what are some systems or processes you've set up for some of those decision-making pieces to happen? Like, for example, I believe that there's like working groups around the current pandemic, et cetera. I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit for folks around how you sort of set up some of those structures.
Sure. First of all, internally, we have two management teams. One management team looks at what's going on in New York and the United States in terms of fundraising, in terms of Entwine, and how all these pieces can be integrated and we can maintain connections. And the other working group is looking at our international programming. How can best practices be shared when the small communities in Italy, many of the challenges that they're facing are not different than peripheral communities in France. I'll give you one example. In Europe today, among Jewish communities, there are probably at 16 or 18 old age homes. Old age homes face Jewish old age homes, they face their own challenges. How do you allow people in? How do you get in the kinds of things that have to get in? How do medical personnel, how do they serve, and so on. We found that putting these people virtually in a room together to talk about best practices, to talk about the kinds of things that they're doing and the solutions that they found has been extremely helpful. And the truth of the matter is that we have been sort of the catalyst and brought people around the table, but the solutions are theirs. And that's what we like. They're sharing with each other, and there's no doubt in my mind that will continue moving forward. So it's with old age homes, it is with schools, schools that are based primarily on fees, tuition, but also how do you do continuing education? It's pretty clear, they didn't talk about this in Israel, but certainly you talk about it in Europe about not reopening the schools for the school year. You have to find ways to engage children. The easy thing to say is, well, go online. But what does that mean? What engages kids? What works? What doesn't work? And also the whole notion of work. The people, their offices are going to be closed for quite a while. Work has to get done. People want to work. How do you balance family and work? How do you balance spouse and children and friends and the kinds of things that we all need as human beings? Those are areas that JDC has tried, sometimes formally, sometimes informally, to bring people together and share ideas.
Thank you. And one other question for you in terms of sort of folks that are sitting in their homes or wherever they are right now, at a time that we're really forced to sort of stay very local, how can we continue to care for those global communities? And how can we also not just care for, but support those global communities?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that, by the way, is a question that's not limited to the time of Corona. It's a question we've been struggling with
Definitely.
for for quite a while. Look, I think Entwine has done a great job with exposing a whole demographic, a whole age cohort that wasn't particularly familiar with what was going on outside the sort of United States-Israel connection, and to the fact that there's a world out there. There's a Jewish world out there. There's a service world that is beyond the Jewish community. I think one is sharing what's going on, and for a forum like this, or sharing some of the material that we send out, or having people on calls. I think learning on your own what's going on. Our website, the Entwine Shabbat, where people can sort of get together and talk about these kinds of issues and be exposed to it, and think, there's some stuff to be done now, but there's a lot of it is going to be done. It's going to have to be done afterwards, and I think people have to, not have to, but hopefully people will be interested in this, and sort of each one will look for the path that's most fitting for him or for her, whether it's funding or whether it's making trips and making connections, or just educating people to the fact that there's a Jewish world out there.
Definitely. And I feel like I've really enjoyed seeing what the JDC Marcom team has been putting out and on social media and other places, and I've been doing my best to start sharing it, and know that I need to step it up also. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm happy that people are reading it. That's great. Yeah. Good.
Definitely. Ariel, are there questions coming in from folks that we want to answer?
Definitely. Happy to switch over to some questions. Kate, thank you for that excellent facilitation.
Thanks, Kate.
As a reminder, if anyone wants to post questions for either Asher or Kate, you can do so in the chat and also in the Q&A function. I posted some of the links that were mentioned, Entwine's thread, JDC's response to the coronavirus on their website. And something I want to call out as well is that Kate works for Repair the World, which does a lot of really incredible work where you can get involved to volunteer here locally. So I'm going to kind of bounce the questions between the two of you to really hit on some of the things that you shared today. So our first question, Asher, is for you. It's a little long question, but I'll try to break it up. How do you prioritize a global response? JDC usually responds to specific needs in local community, but this is truly a global pandemic. You gave us some examples before about working with people locally in terms of decision making, in terms of understanding what they need. But is there a blueprint for all of this? Has it been improvised? Like, how have you had to shift the JDC strategy from this local to the global?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I would say that I think I have to answer that in a couple of ways. First of all, I once heard someone speak about the role of the Federation in a community and the Federation response to September 11th. And what the point that the person made, which I felt was very profound at the time and really speaks to me, knowing JDC as I do, she said, we were able to respond on September 11th because we were there on September 10th. And what we're seeing is that a work through communities around the world. For example, almost every leader of a Jewish community in Europe under the age of 50 is both a graduate of Sarbash, the summer camp in Hungary, and is also a graduate of at least some of JDC's training programs. One of the things that we've been involved in Europe the last few years is resilience, community resilience, which we got involved in because of the whole issue of anti-Semitism. We're not a political organization, but we wanted to teach communities how they can respond when they're challenged or when they are, when there's some sort of threat. It works for anti-Semitism. It's working now for Corona. The first thing you do is put together a small emergency management team, and sort of step by step, communities are following the advice and the training that they've gotten prior to that, and that's I think positioned our people in Europe very well, and I think the same thing is happening all around the world from us. So in terms of setting priorities, in many ways, the communities are setting priorities based on their own training, and we're responding to try and help them and empower them. That's what we're in this business for. I don't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself.
Okay.
Following up on that, are you seeing communities really balancing the response in terms of the programmatic perspective, like the community building, working with young leadership, versus the humanitarian perspective, addressing food scarcity in the slums or other basic human needs? And how do you help communities manage that dichotomy in responses?
Mm-hmm. You mean inside the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community is what you're asking?
I think both. Like in a crisis time, how do you choose to prioritize either programs and that community building element, or choose to prioritize the humanitarian needs?
Look, in an ideal world, you find the right balance. I have to say, in most instances, right now, the immediate response is dealing with people's health and the impact of, and the rest. It's. I'm not sure what the right word is. Interesting really isn't the word, but this is the first time that JDC, through its history and certainly in the 30 plus years that I've been with it, we have responded to crises, wars, all sorts of hostilities, sometimes localized health issues. We know how to respond to that very well, but there was always an issue of we, the respondents, responders, were in a good position, and we were helping people who were at risk. We're in a situation now where everyone's at risk. A volunteer may be helping someone who's lonely and concerned because he or she is worried about his or her health, but the person who's responding is just as worried about his or her health. It's a new perspective for us. I say that often when I speak to the haves, and I try and describe to them what it's like to be a have-not. In a sense, all of us are have-nots now. All of us are victims in some way of this, of the virus. I think that, to a large extent, all the social aspects of community development have been put aside for now. The real challenge, I think, is going to be in the next few months as we begin to emerge from this. That's where the issue of how do you find the balance is going to be real. Do you keep the resources flowing the way they've been the last few months to address the immediate needs? Or do you understand that you have to find some sort of balance? No community in the world is based exclusively on its welfare services. A Jewish community needs education, it needs social settings, it needs programs for all different ages. Communities are each one will find a different way, a different formula to address those. And we're really here basically to help ask the questions and then help them with the answers that they find, not to provide the answers for them.
Thanks. And thinking about resources, we have a question about funding and budget. For programs that have been canceled because of COVID, like Sarbash this summer, or some other local community programming, what happens to that funding? Is it allocated to the COVID response effort, or will it be able to be rolled over to programs for next year?
If you want to put your finger on what one of my biggest challenges and my colleagues' biggest challenges, that's it. A lot of those, the funding for those programs are coming from donors who have particular interests and they want to fund a particular interest. So the question is, Sarbash is canceled. Can we go back to the donor and say to the donor, look, yes, Sarbash is canceled, but it's really important to us. There are expenses that are related to Sarbash, even a canceled camp. The physical facility has to be dealt with, and there are expenses that have already been laid out. There are people, who bought travel tickets that some of which are fully refunded, but a lot of them are not. How do we go to a donor and say, we want you also to give money for something that isn't happening? How do we, when we close JCCs, on the face of it, you do it because you can't have programming, social distancing, and so on. reopening those JCCs 5, 6, 7 months after they've been closed to reopen an institution is not easy. And that's one of the things that we're giving a lot of thought to. And we also have to think about, in everything that we do, when we reconstruct, do we look to replicate what was, or do we use this as an opportunity to go in new directions? In other words, not yes JCC or no JCC, but is the JCC that opens in St. Petersburg in October the same JCC that closed in February? Or is it a JCC with, and by the way, when I pose it that way, we all say, well, we should take the opportunity. Not quite all that simple, but it's one of the things that we are giving a lot of thought to.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And it's those conversations are happening in Jewish communities all over the world.
Everywhere. Look, I don't think that because we're so deep into this, our personal lives are changed. Our work lives are going to change. The notion of free time, the notion of how we spend money, what we spend money on, all of those things, I think they will be different. But even where they're not different, we have to give thought to it some months later. I mean, we took so many things for granted that we're not going to be able to take for granted for a long time.
Definitely. Kate, I want to turn it to you. We have a lot of questions from people about volunteering, whether locally or globally. And as Kate, you work for Repair the World. I know there's a lot of incredible work your organization is doing to connect people to the elderly or to people to those in need. Could you give us a bit of an overview of what Repair is doing right now? And then I'll tie it back into getting involved with JDC abroad as well.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I think that for me, like one of the things that I think about from a personal note is that the reason that I started to care so much for our world was like through my JDC experiences and seeing what I was able to both witness and also experience and support when I was abroad with JDC. And now thinking about how I bring it back to my local community is a huge reason why I work at Repair the World and why I care so much about both the global and also the local pieces. But I think I so much resonate with what Asher shared around that caring for the most vulnerable has like never been so important in my lifetime. And I think for Repair, we really are resonating and really feeling like our mission has never been more relevant around mobilizing Jews and their communities to take action to pursue a just world. And so for us, what that means is that the ways that we are shifting what we are doing, the sort of like bread and butter of what we do is really face-to-face connection as well, meeting pressing urgent needs with different people and communities, whether it is working in food pantries, whether it's tutoring, whether it is doing different types of housing justice type of work. We are really thinking about those sort of needs that folks have, and through this pandemic have really shifted many of the ways we're continuing to work. A couple of examples. One of the things we're really trying to work on is when we can to be able to shift what we've been doing locally to virtual outlets. So one of the things that we see is, for example, hosting a program where we ask folks to write either letters or create some type of art to give to seniors in isolation, have some conversation around it, and then let it digitally through email be sent to them to then be printed out in a safe way that is going to meet all the CDC guidelines in order to do that. Another example is we're still doing some like small in-person volunteering in the communities that we are. So for example, in Brooklyn last week, we were delivering food packages to Holocaust survivors who used to be getting it from some other sources, mostly from volunteers who are more in the vulnerable sort of age group, and now trying to get people who are in a place where they're feeling comfortable to go and do it, to get out there and do it. But that sort of like piece around caring for others and has never been so relevant. And I'm happy to share with others as well if there's any other questions or people want to get involved.
Thank you for that. Really grateful to have such amazing partners at Repair the World who are allowing us to connect with our communities locally and globally. And it's really special to hear that. And just of note, we at Entwine are working to put together a way to connect to the elderly in the former Soviet Union, but I encourage everyone, we did on our call last week, WhatsApp your friends who you've met on your trips and communities abroad, just connect. That's really one of the most important things we can do right now. And if you need any help getting contact information, reach out to us and we'll do our best to get it to you. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to the rest of our questions. I want to make sure to respect everyone's time, but you can always feel free to reach out to me or to anyone on the Entwine team with questions, and we can get back to you with an answer. A few things to share from Entwine and the thread. Next week, actually, sorry, this Friday, tomorrow, at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, Entwine's own Rabbi Josh Makudis is going to be hosting a very special Shabbat experience. We really hope that you can join us. You can find more information on our Facebook and on our website that I'll post in the chat in a second. Next week on Entwine Exclusive, we're going to be doing a very special episode with Amir Shaviv and Margarita Carol. We're going to be talking about the 30th anniversary of Operation Passover, which really signified the renewal of Jewish life in the former Soviet Union. And we'll talk about how we can apply those lessons to what we're experiencing today in a world where Passover is going to look very different for us. And I also want to highlight our RSJ podcast, which actually features an interview with Asher and talking to other Russian-speaking Jews living across North America and learning about their experiences. And finally, when I end this call, you should all have a survey pop up. We really want to do our best to serve our community in a way that works best for you, and we want to learn from you. So we really appreciate your feedback and taking the time to fill out that quick questionnaire. And lastly, just thank you again to Asher and Kate. This was truly wonderful to have both of you in this space and to learn from you and just to gain this global perspective on the pandemic and its impact on the global Jewish community. And I hope that you both and everybody on this call stays healthy and stays sane during this bit of a crazy time. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye, Kate. Thank you very much. And Ariel, and everybody was on. Thank you.
You too. Thanks, Asher. And early Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.